Hello and welcome to Proud Malcontent on this Sunday, the 12th of October. I'm Pete Bell and I am a proud malcontent. Later on, as ever on a Sunday, we'll be joined by Stephen Duncan, a resident number cruncher, who will be looking at where we are at the moment, where we stand right now in terms of numbers, polls, etc. Where we stand right now is right chin deep in shit. That's where we stand right now. As you'd expect, I will have some comments to make about the SNP conference and the supposed debate on independence strategy yesterday, and by now you will all know the outcome of that. As the National proclaims this morning, SNP members vote for John Swinney's independence strategy. Well, of course, there is no independence strategy, and the delegates couldn't vote for an independence strategy because no independence strategy was being proposed. Not even with Graham McCormick's amendment, it didn't really give any teeth to the leadership resolution. It just fiddled with it a bit. It didn't change it dramatically. But Stephen Duncan and I were chatting just before I came on air, excuse me, and we were talking about what I call voter inertia. The fact that wherever activists and anoraks, such as myself and probably most of you, because you're watching this, where we are right now, it takes a long time for the average voter, I'm not comfortable with that term, but the average voter, the electorate, the dumb beast electorate, that big mass of the electorate, the people who think they're doing enough, they're participating in democracy if they vote once every year, every 2 years, or even maybe every 4 years if they only vote in one election. And it takes them a long time to catch up with wherever we are, wherever the activists and anoraks are right now, because we are watching the situation the whole time. We're way ahead of them. It takes them a long time to catch up. And I was looking at that headline in the Sunday National after that conversation and thinking, well, this is part of the reason. This is part of the reason that it takes the public, the general public, the electorate, the big dumb beast. This is part of the reason that it takes that big dumb beast so long to catch up with the rest of us, because the media are misleading them, and that includes the National. We have the National here talking about John Swinney's independence strategy. Now, the sort of casual voter, occasional voter that we're talking about here is also the sort of person who only reads the headlines and maybe the stand for the first paragraph or couple of paragraphs in any story. And if they do that with the National, then they'll be, that's what they know, because that's what they've been told. The SNP members have voted for John Swinney's independence strategies. So if they are pro-independence voters, they will say, oh, good, I'll vote for SNP. But what are they actually voting for? It's not what the National says, the Sunday National, I should say. It's not what the Sunday National says. It is not an independence strategy. What they are voting for is for John Swinney to commit the treachery of begging for another Section 30 order so that we can repeat the experience of 2014, except that we cannot repeat the experience of 2014 because everything has changed since then. The independence movement has changed, the SNP has changed, everything has changed. The British state has changed dramatically since then. So we cannot repeat the experience of 2014. John Swinney imagines that he can engineer the fluke of 2011 when the SNP got a majority. He imagines if he puts it to the electorate in the way that he does, that you have to vote SNP if you want independence. He imagines he's going to get that kind of majority that Alex Salmond got back in 2011. And it's not going to happen. You cannot engineer a fluke. And the SNP is not where it was then. In 2011, the SNP had massive support. I mean, pretty much the entire independence movement was prepared, if not happy, to go along with the SNP. When the Yes campaign started, we all piled in, even those of us who had doubts about certain aspects of it, we all piled in. We had that purpose. Win a yes vote. What happens after that? Well, that remains to be seen. This time, it's not happening. And you can tell from some of the comments on social media, a lot of the comments on social media, that people who were previously prepared to give the SNP another chance are now saying, no way, I'm having nothing to do with them ever again, because the general feeling now that the SNP has really let down. We knew that the SNP leadership had let us down, and now it looks like the membership are going to have let us down as well, because they have sided with the leadership, and they've put party. I'm been trying to be very careful what I say here. They have put party before cause and country. There's been solely focused, as John Swinney is, on getting the SNP elected, keeping the SNP in power. Now, there may be reasons for that. There may be reasons why that is necessary. The SNP still works as a shield against the unionist parties. But that does not mean to say that it's working for independence, because it isn't. There was no strategy for independence. And what really irked me as much as anything was the comments that were coming from some of these the people leaving the hall after the vote. And I just find it incredible, the attitude of some people. Here's one. I'm quite happy with that. I'm content with that. But what I think was good was that the alternative views were all openly discussed. But they weren't. No, there were a lot of alternative views which weren't discussed, which weren't mentioned. I'll go back to the Newington resolution, which was buried from the outset. And the Sunday National actually helped inter it by just totally ignoring it. That view was never heard. The view that the SNP, instead of harking back to 2011, the SNP should take an entirely new approach. That view was never heard. What Graham McCormick was proposing was not an entirely new approach. It was just a different way of going down the same route as John Swinney. It was just a different way of getting that mandate. It just said that instead of the SNP only method that John Swinney wanted, Graham McCormick was suggesting or the amendment was suggesting that we go with a de facto referendum, a plebiscite referendum. But if that mandate was gained, what happened after that was not going to be any different. I can assure you of that. Graham McCormick and others will protest that that is not the case. But I foresaw the possibility that the SNP leadership might actually accept the plebiscite part. Of course, although they had to accept the amendment as a whole, but they would in fact have accepted the plebiscite part of that. They would have agreed that it was not to be the SNP only approach of John Swinney, that it was to be what I shall call, for the sake of shorthand, the Graham McCormick approach, which included all pro-independence parties. Nominally pro-independence parties. But then once that mandate was gained, it would be a mandate for the same thing, because it's a mandate for the same party, for the same government, for the same leadership. And that leadership will do nothing, is totally wedded to the Section 30 process, totally wedded to the Sturgeon doctrine. So even if it gained the impression, even if that amendment was passed, it was still going to end up the same way. It was still going to end up with John Swinney going begging for a Section 30 order. And that is, as we know, that's an act of treachery. This same person exiting the SNP conference after the vote went on to say, I think it's got the best chance of working. I think it's got a better chance based on the debate than if it went with if we went with any of the amendments that were rejected. I don't see how having had that debate makes the approach any better. It maybe makes the delegates and the membership feel better about it. Oh, we had a debate, and so, this must be the best way. But not all options were looked at. The SNP made sure the options were restricted to their own, I say they'll use the word plan advisedly and hesitantly. The options were limited to their own plan, John Swinney's strategy, another word I use reluctantly, and an amendment which actually gave John Swinney a mandate to do the same thing, although the delegates would be able to kid themselves on that they'd actually voted for something else. The mandate would have been used for the same purpose, the Section 30. And that amendment was pretty much scuppered by the people who made it, because there was a bit tacked on at the end about creating a provisional government and an independence delivery unit. And delegates were going to look at that and say, what's this nonsense about? But we have an independence delivery unit. It's the Scottish government. Why duplicate what we already have? Why do we need a provisional pro-independence government when we have an actual pro-independence parliament, an actual pro-independence? Remember, this is what the delegates are saying. We've got an actual pro-independence party in government. So why duplicate all that? So that final paragraph of Amendment A pretty much scuppered it. That was going to deter a lot of delegates. But even if that amendment had passed, John Swinney would have been quite comfortable with it. he would have accepted the plebiscite so long as he got a mandate. He didn't really care how he got it. I'm very conscious of the time here, and we mustn't tread all over Stephen's time. But I just want to quote some more of these. I will have to call them SNP loyalists, put party before country and cause. Here's another one. There's a lot of thought process has gone into it. John Swinney, a lot of thought process. It's just saying, let's do it all over again, the same as we did. Let's pretend it's 2011 again, and we're looking for this mandate. There's no thought gone into that at all. What thought did it require to say, we'll just try and repeat what happened before by engineering the fluke that happened in 2011 and then just going exactly the same route again? A lot of thought process gone into it. Whoever said that's just a damn fool. And I think it's the right time to talk about independence and get to the voters as soon as possible. He added, I think it's a fresh look at it. Gee, oh, bloody dear, where has this person been? A fresh look at it. No, it's not. There's nothing fresh about it. It's stinking. It's been lying around for 15 years. It's stinking. It was used up in 2014. It's dead. That whole approach is dead. John Swinney knows that. He must know that. He's not a stupid man. This actually proves that he's actually not interested in independence. He's not going for independence, or he wouldn't be doing what he's going to do. Here's another one. Yeah, I felt that we had a good discussion about the reasons why we need to seek a democratic way to go forward with independence. And I think that was resolutely supported, and John Swinney led the way very well. These people are just totally deluded. I think it will work. I think that bringing it to the conference for a major debate like this lends legitimacy to what he's trying to achieve. Yeah, I'm sure it lends legitimacy to, but what is it legitimizing? It's legitimizing John Swinney going forward and denying the sovereignty of the Scottish people, validating the alien doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty by asking Starmer for a Section 30 order, because that is giving Westminster the last word. It is accepting Westminster's authority to say no. And once that is accepted, you can't go back. He's setting a precedent now that will scupper future events. I explained this before, but one of the things that we had to do is repudiate the Section 30 process. And one of the reasons that we had to repudiate the Section 30 process is that when it comes to the bit, if we take the human rights approach to this, when we say we want the opportunity to exercise our right of self-determination, and we have to break the rules in order to do that, because there is no other way. Well, the British state is now going to turn around and say, but of course there is another way. There's a democratic way. Your own government, your own national party, the Party of Independence, has accepted that the Section 30 process is perfectly valid. So we will no longer have the ability to claim that the Scottish Parliament asserting legislative competence in matters relating to the Constitution, we will no longer be able to claim that that's the only way that we can exercise our right of self-determination, because John Swinney is validating a process that the British Parliament will exploit in order to stymie it, in order to make sure that it won't work. A Section 30 referendum cannot work because it gives the Westminster, it gives the British state the final word. Whatever the outcome of a Section 30 referendum, it goes to Westminster, it goes to London, and they decide what it all means. They get to say what it all means, and we have no way to dispute it. Our government has no way to dispute it because they have accepted that the British government can do that. So even if we vote yes, the British state can overrule us. That's colonisation. It is the colonial power. Effectively, Keir Starmer could outvote the entire population of Scotland. If we got 100% turnout in this referendum that John Swinney is going begging for, if it actually happened, and it won't because Starmer, 99% certain he'll say no, but if it was to happen, and if there was 100% turnout and 100% voted yes, Keir Starmer could still turn round and say no. He has that power. That is the power that the union gives them. He wouldn't say a direct no, of course. He would use delaying tactics. He'd use he'd say, well, this has certainly given us this something to think about. We will have to go away and mull it over and decide what's the best way to go forward. Appoint a royal commission, perhaps. And take 5-7 years to report, and meanwhile Scotland is being sucked dry. Can we stand of these? I think every single person in that room was in the pursuit of independence for Scotland. No, they were in pursuit, like John Swinney, they were in pursuit of votes for the SNP. That's all pursuit of. And that's what we need. So the fact that we've now got a policy that we can all get behind is absolutely fantastic. Fandabidozy it is. Except that it's not a policy we can all get behind. There's a sizable chunk of the independence movement that is looking on in absolute horror at what the SNP membership is doing here. Because this is the membership speaking, remember. These are delegates who have said this. These are delegates who have approved John Swinney's treachery. They are prepared to go along with that treachery just to get a win for their tribe. It's not a policy that we can all go along with. I cannot possibly, speaking from a personal point of view, possibly vote SNP because I would be voting to deny the sovereignty of Scotland's people and validate the alien doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. I am not going to vote for that. I'm a Scottish nationalist. I am not going to vote for that. I cannot vote for that. My conscience will not let me vote for that. Another look at this. When pressed on whether it will ultimately work, this person said, I should have blanked these names. This person said, I hope so. I've got no crystal ball, but I'll be out every day pounding the streets, knocking doors to make it work. I'd be very cautious, my friend, when you're knocking doors. You're knocking doors, telling people what John Swinney is preparing to do, what you have now consented to him doing, approved him doing. When you tell people that, if they are in the slightest bit aware of Scotland's constitutional position, they're going to chase you. You know, I won't say they'll get violent. You know, there are always people like that, but the population, they're not going to be impressed by this. But repeat the whole thing. They're not going to be impressed by that. I don't know where these people are coming from with this kind of thinking. I don't know where it comes from. One last one, and then I've got to stop on this. I will be writing something I haven't written an article about this yet because, frankly, when the vote came in yesterday afternoon, I was just too angry. Here's one last one. I started out properly campaigning and knocking doors by the lowest of the lows in 2023, when we were really struggling and I got shouted at. And I think what we've seen is that we are rebuilding that trust, and you can see it on the doorstep. I don't know what doorsteps he's on, and he's talking. Remember, he's not talking about independence here. He's talking about his party. He's talking about the party. So people are starting to trust the party again. Well, I'm afraid I don't see that. I don't see any sign of that. Then Graham McCormick. Graham McCormick gets the final word. Graham McCormick, who is speaking for the amendment A, the one with that slit its own throat in the final paragraph. And Graham McCormick says what we're probably all thinking. John Swinney, is still to answer the question, what happens when they say no? Well, I have to say to you, Graham, that's not the only question. No, possibly the most important one. The important one is what happens if they say yes, because that does a lot of damage. That's a lot more damaging than them saying no, because if a Section 30 referendum goes ahead, the implications of that are disastrous for Scotland's cause. And I've explained that before, the reasons for saying that I explained before, and I will explain them again at some point. I'm just not going into it just now, because right now we have to join Stephen Duncan, or Stephen Duncan has to join us, whichever way around. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Right, you're a wee bit loud there. It's good to hear you, but you're just a wee bit loud, my friend. Okay.
I shall turn it down.
That's good.
How's that?
That's better. That's better. So long as people can hear you and make out what you're saying.
Okay.
And, let's not stick with the subject of the SNP and the disastrous vote yesterday. Appalling vote, dreadful. Let's move on from that, and let's take a look at what you're going to be talking about today. Perhaps you could go through that, Stephen, while I have a look. We've got some comments coming in. I'll have a look at the comments and come back to people on that if you tell everybody what we're discussing today.
Okay, well, it's as you mentioned earlier on, it's these damned opinion polls again. I'm really looking at what's happened over the time period 2012 to date, and sort of mapping the main events to the evolution of the yes sentiment in these reflected in these opinion surveys. So that's the sort of theme of today, looking at competing claims as in terms of, whether we're, whether yes has been sort of soaring in the opinion polls, or skyrocketing, as the National is prone to say, or whether some of the more skeptical blogs and commentators are arguing that it's yes support has been pretty flat,
that's
stagnant.
That's me you're talking about there.
Well, I suppose yourself and Wings and a couple of others.
There's quite a lot. I just interrupted just briefly there, Stephen, because there's some comments coming, and it's what I was saying about there being this idea that everybody getting behind it is that's a lot of nonsense, and we can see that just from some of the comments that have come in. So I'll just briefly run through them. There's Ian Mathieson, my good friend Ian, and he says Swinney is just a devolutionist and not an independence man now. Time the SNP got off their knees and stopped begging to the English Parliament. Then there's Carl Thornton. I'm tired of SNP dangling the carrot of independence and never delivering. So disappointed with the SNP. Then here's another one. Zuni, spot on re Section 30 crap. Thanks for your hard work. I appreciate that, Zuni. Thanks very much. And one last one. The solution is now what it's always been. We must do what Ireland had to do, take our independence by force if necessary. I don't think we want to see that kind of thing again, John. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from on that. I can understand the frustration that drives you to say that. But let's be a little cautious about the talk of using force. Democracy is still extant in Scotland. We're just not using it very well. Let's use democracy better. Apologies, Stephen, for that interruption. And I'll now let you get back to your presentation.
Okay, so I've given the introduction to it, so we'll just move on to the next slide, and there's the competing claims, just to reiterate them. Sort of national headline on the left-hand side, delete as appropriate, and on the right-hand side, some of the more sceptical, some would say realistic views of where what's happened to yes support over the last 10 years since the referendum. Just before we move on, just a quick reminder and a recap about opinion polls. I mentioned this before, but always worthwhile to reiterate it. Their essential purpose is twofold, as I see it, and that's to measure the level of support and also the changes or the trend in the attribute of interest, which in this case is yes support in opinion polls. You should bear in mind the survey firms have different methodologies for data collection and for estimating what the yes is in the population. I've put a few examples down there of what they are. Individual polling firms, therefore, have their own inbuilt procedural biases. It's necessarily because they use slightly different criteria, even though their broad approach, their broad methodology is systematic and the same. So it's not institutional bias we're talking about here, talking about procedural bias to do with methodology. And finally, as I've said before a few times, that you should only ever compare a single survey result with that of previous surveys from the same pollster. So you don't have distortions and you're comparing like with like.
Can I just say is it valid to take an average over a number of polls? Would that work as well as sticking with the comparing the same pollster? Would taking, say, 10, 20 polls and averaging them, would that sort of flatten it out so as to compensate for the different methodologies?
Yes, it would, as long as they're not the basket of polls that you're taking are not dominated by one or two polling firms in one basket, and the other one's got a completely different mix of pollsters. But generally, if you're taking 10 in each or 50 each, you'll have a fairly representative bunch in each, and you would think that you would mitigate or offset some of the individual biases and get a reasonable estimate. It's reasonable to do that. Just so you know, Peter, I am planning on doing a separate piece, a two-parter on methodology and what the different pollsters actually do and how it all works, at least at a conceptual level, but we'll look at that at a later date. But to answer your question, yes, I think that's fine. But if you're doing it on an individual polling basis, do not compare a poll from Survation with one from Norstat, for example.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. That's, yeah, again, that is clear. It's interesting that you're going to be looking at the methodology. I know a lot of people actually take an interest in that. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, so there's a couple of charts here that look at the yes support on an annual level since 2012. The left-hand side chart looks at the movement in yes in the run-up to the referendum between 2012 and 2014, and that yes support is measured by that unbroken blue line. You can see quite clearly there's an incremental increase over that time period. It's not spectacular, but it is noticeable. It runs from about 38% through the course of 2012 to about 50% by the end of 2014. So it's a sizable increase, and you can fairly reasonably put that down to the fact that there's a process in place. There's a campaign, and there was a date for the referendum. That generated the momentum, and there's your result. You've got an actual step change in the level of support for yes over that time period. Now, contrast that with the right-hand side chart, which is the last 10 years since the referendum, and you can see that the blue line, if you run a sort of trend line through that, that's the broken blue line. It's fairly flat. There's virtually no gradient at all on that. There's a bit of oscillation around that line, but there's no real underlying change in the level. What you've got is around the 2015, 2017 period, there's a sizable dip when we were informed apparently that our vote in 2015 wasn't a vote for independence by our then First Minister. No doubt that caused some disappointment. It was a dip in the polls, and then you've seen the increase again subsequently when you had the between 2019 and 2021, where you've got Johnson landing as Prime Minister. You've got Brexit occurring, and then you've got the pandemic event, which caused a spike in support. So I think what that tells you is there's no actual actions occurring that were promoting independence in that time period, I would suggest. And where you've got where the politicians are, vacillate, the opinion polls tend to oscillate. They go up and down. Nothing is sustained.
Yeah, there's a correlation there between something happening and the polls rising. I think that's a very important point. The action begets support. Inaction begets disinterest and detachment. And because there has been no perceivable action on the independence for the last 14 years, that's why the averages out to just a flat line. Is that correct?
Pretty much, I would say. I think everything stopped. I mean, the step increase you've seen is happened in the last quarter of the last time we've seen a step change was in the last quarter of 2014, when you had that sort of deferred momentum that came through from the campaign. People perhaps resenting what Cameron said just after the referendum, the morning after the referendum, and the support continued to rise. Now there's been ups and downs since then. More or less, it's 50%. That's where the mean level is, I would suggest, over the last 10 years.
One other point I'd like to address at this stage, and is where people say, "Oh, great, we went from the polls at least went from 38% to 50%. That's around an increase of about 30%, which in polling terms is huge. It's a surge. The National could actually call that soaring, and I wouldn't have laughed at them, not quite so much anyway. We get people now saying, well, we've got this new starting point. We're starting from a higher level. So if we can repeat the whole experience from the last, we can expect another 12% rise. We can expect a 12-point rise. We can go from the present around 50% to maybe somewhere near 60%, possibly over 50%. They think that because we're starting from a higher base, that it's going to be easier to get to the conclusive yes vote that we actually need. But that isn't the case, is it?
Well, it depends how effective your campaign is and how good your messaging is, and if it's targeted properly in the right way at the right segments of the population. But you have to have done your work first of all. You have to break your population down, do your learn the lessons of the past, which I don't think anybody's done particularly. If it has, if they have, they haven't published any documents on it. And you canvass your population, you segment it, break it down, see where the high levels of support are, high incidence for yeses, and see where the low levels are. Work out where it's high. Why is it high? Why is it low in other areas? And make your messaging match, the segments. Put your effort where it needs to be done if you think you can make a difference, and tailor your action that way. None of that stuff is happening. It's like doing a marketing campaign. I don't know whether you worked in marketing. I didn't, but I do. Obviously, in statistics, marketeers took the data-driven approach and said we can use that to to sell our products or to sell our products, and it works. It's amazing. So you could, there's no reason why we couldn't apply this politically.
A political campaign is just a marketing exercise. I say just a marketing exercise, but that's what it is. It's a marketing exercise. The product that we're trying to sell is Scotland's independence. It is a marketing exercise, but you can't say that it's being run as such. If it was a marketing exercise, we wouldn't be selling much at all. We certainly wouldn't be a brand leader. But what I had in mind was the point that the way I've described it is that the marketing campaign is like climbing a mountain. And you've got the foothills. We can say, okay, we've trudged the foothills. But then it starts to get steeper and steeper and steeper. And the last part is impossible to climb. It's unscalable. But the climbing gets more difficult. Adding each meter to the height takes more and more effort. And it's like that with a marketing campaign. Getting the first 50% of your target sales is probably quite easy. Just put the product out there and it'll sell. But then it gets increasingly difficult after that. So starting from a higher base doesn't mean a thing. Because we've already picked the low-hanging fruit. We've got that. And we can tell there is low-hanging fruit because none of it's gone back up onto the trees since 2014. That support has stayed. That's about the only good news there is. But what that tells us, these are people that were probably already committed to independence, or at least they were halfway there, 3/4 of the way there, and they just needed that little nudge, little nudge of having an actual referendum and an actual date. So we've got them. But what's happened is that the marketing campaign has failed to address the upper slopes. We've done the ground hills and the lower slopes. The marketing campaign has failed to address the upper slopes and the sheer cliff that comes after that. It gets more and more difficult to get these votes the higher you go. Yeah. That's the point I was trying to make.
And I think it's a good point as well. In fact, if you take a look at that chart that was up there a minute ago, if it can, on the left-hand side, you can see it's a fairly, just to bring out your point, it's a fairly straight line, that blue line. It's very linear, very, and I think what you're saying is that that people who are making these claims, although it's going to be easier because we're at 50% now, that line will just carry on extending. But in fact, these people will be harder nuts, will be harder nuts to crack, and that line will have to go at an accelerated rate. So it'll have to be exponential growth, not just a straight carried on a straight line, and we'll have to take a different approach to crack these nuts. It won't. It may well take a sledgehammer rather than just a little sort of tinkering around with a small sort of implement.
Well, you used the correct phrase there, Stephen, a different approach. It will take a different approach in order to scale the next bit of the mountain. It will take actual mountaineers and not just hill walkers. But the different approach that you're saying, that is not happening, because what SNP conference has approved is an attempt to repeat the experience of 15 years ago, when the Yes campaign first started. The period from 2011 and the election of that majority SNP government to the end of 2014. John Swinney, all his ambition, you can't even call it ambition. The only thing he can think about is repeating that, like it can be repeated. Like you can just take a chunk of history and go back and rewind and play it over again. It's the very opposite to a different approach. It's a duplicate approach.
Yeah. Quite. So I think we've done that slide. So I'll just move on to the next one. So 3 charts here we're looking at individual pollsters now rather than them all sort of aggregated. The left-hand side, the top one, small top one on the left-hand side, is quite clear. All the opinion pollsters, panel-based, Survation, YouGov, and Ipsos that are mentioned there, and these are the pollsters that dominate the polling on the Scottish question, both in 2014 and now. They're all showing the same sort of increase through that time, through that period. There's a quite a step increase in the increase in yes. Compare that to the chart below it. It's one of peaks and troughs for all the pollsters. Exactly the same as the aggregation that if you take any one of these opinion pollsters that I've just mentioned, they could represent in aggregate what the opinion polls are saying in the previous over that period from 2015 to 2025. The one exception to that I would just draw your attention to very briefly is that purple line. That's Find Out Now, who only started polling in 2011. And what's significant about so there's nothing to do with they have not covered the period whether the pandemic was on, Brexit, the referendum, or anything like that. But the significant thing about Find Out Now is it's virtually a flat line. There's no relationship between yes support and the time period below. The reason why there's no relationship with the time period because nothing's going on in that time. There are no actions taking place. There is no campaign in place. Nothing to promote independence. So moving on to the right-hand side, what I've done now is looked at all the individual polls of Norstat panel base over the period 2012 through to currently, and I think that's around about, I don't know how many they've done, an awful lot. And what I've tried to do is map on the main events, which we might call missed opportunities, over that time period to see if you can depict any kind of sort of relationship between things that happen and yes support over that timeline. So again, if you look at we work from the left to the right on the 20 run in the run up to the 2014 referendum. Hopes are rising. A nation again. There's that small, that incremental increase in yes support. A little mini slump before on the eve of the referendum when support fell back to just under 5%. Then it re-established itself in the immediate post-referendum period. We had the tsunami election, sentiment rises again, the spike there, and then you see the big step in, the big sort of uptick at the time of the Brexit vote in the middle of 2016. Wasn't sustained, however, because we had, of course, about a year later, the Great Reset that Nicola Sturgeon sort of announced after the 2017 surprise election. And if you take a look at that downward dip there, that's about the only time since the referendum that we've gone below the referendum result. Bottoms out about 43%. Panel base there in the middle of that time series before it picks up again. We've got the chaos of the May government, and then Boris Johnson arrives.
That dip there, that huge dip below the election result, I think coincides with really the first iteration of the Sturgeon doctrine, the whole thing about a legal and constitutional referendum, that we must defer to Westminster and so on. That says something very significant about Nicola Sturgeon's leadership and her so-called strategy, does it not?
Yes, well, I think there's a lot of things going. That's certainly one aspect of it. I think it appeared to me that at the time that she lost her nerve when the election result of 2017 came through. I think she requested from memory, requested a referendum at about March, April time, 2017. There was an election in June. The SNP fell back from 56 seats to 35 seats. The percentage of the vote fell, and rather than pursuing it, she just decided, well, actually, maybe we better think about this again, and didn't just keep sort of pursuing it, because Brexit still hadn't gone away. Brexit was still going to happen, and that was the big pitch, was that that's not what we voted for. Then at that point, it seemed to be, well, let's try and change England's viewpoint on Brexit and get them to reverse that, rather than just holding your nerve, pursuing what they were elected to do, which was to look after realise Scotland's cause.
Yeah, there's a lot more that could be said about that, about what Nicola Sturgeon, the choices that she made in that period. But time's running short, so as interesting as that discussion might be, we have to get back to your presentation.
Okay, well, I'll crack on with this because you're right, time is passing. So yes, there's a pickup in support again right through the period of actual Brexit. At the beginning of 2020, there was the announcement there was going to be a constitutional convention. Then support peaks through, about middle of 2020 with the pandemic, where the Scottish government is perceived as doing a better job at managing it than Westminster. Then there's a big dip again after that, as people realised that maybe when Nicola Sturgeon announced her cease and desist decree to the wider independence movement a few months earlier, 6-7 months earlier, that fact she did mean that, and we weren't going to do anything. And independence support, or yes support, falls again. There's another spike at the end of 2022, around about the time the UK Supreme Court ruling is made that stated that the Scottish Parliament cannot run a referendum on the question of independence. Nicola Sturgeon resigns, Humza comes in, we're in the doldrums for a while, and then there's a pickup in support in the last, I don't know, 12 months perhaps, coinciding roughly with John Swinney coming into as First Minister. And I would suggest that is absolutely a coincidence. And it's much more to do with the unpopularity of Keir Starmer's government in Westminster and how they've, making all these unpopular decisions and, U-turning on just about everything they said in their campaign. So I'll move on to the conclusions since time is of the essence. So what is that? I would suggest that the statement that yes is soaring or surging is complacent and it's arrogant. We're not skyrocketing. What's happening is a pattern of spikes and dips, but there's no sustained change since the last quarter of 2014. At the same time, the second claim is overstated. It's and it's probably overstated for effect. There's a bit of hyperbole there. It's not absolutely flatlining. We've seen that yes, support does react to events, to things that happen. Brexit, the COVID, UK Supreme Court ruling, but there's no sustained underlying change. And that's what's important. The only step change has been is Q4 in 2014. And I've got a few other comments down there. Just finally to say that the experience of the referendum period, the 2 years running up to it, is that when you've got a plan that is, specific and measurable, achievable, with a campaign that's solely focused on, on winning a vote for independence or getting a majority for independence, put it that way, you're united on a single goal, and you've got determined and smart leadership, then you can make things happen. I would suggest that all of these criteria I've just mentioned are not in play at the moment, and certainly not as a result of yesterday's conference, as you were stating earlier, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It will be interesting to see how the polls react to the conference decision. My suspicion is that it will be perceived by the wider public as one of these actions that causes a surge, and then that will be portrayed by the SNP leadership as validating John Swinney's approach. Say, look, it's working, but it'll be a spike which just falls off again because there is nothing there to sustain, because it all depends on stuff happening in the future that just can't happen. You can't engineer a fluke. So, and there's always this question of what happens if they say no, and also what happens if they say yes. Nobody has answered that question of what if they say no. And given that it's 99% certain that they'll say no, but I suspect the polls will appear to validate the SNP's approach, John Swinney's approach. You think?
Yeah. I think there'll be I think there's going to be a poll. I don't know what's happening with the polls, but I suspect there'll be a slew of polls out. Because conference season usually is some, but at this time, and I suspect there will be an initial reaction. It'll be purely emotionally based. Oh, here we go. There'll be a step up. There'll be a spike upwards. Maybe 1-2% up in some of the polls, and then that'll all be proclaimed as a great triumph. The National will trumpet it. And then in a month's time, they'll dip back down again. And the next time they have an opinion poll, Christmas coming up, and it will be forgotten about that. In fact, that it was only temporary. I think that's what will happen. It'll just be up and down. It will be a continuation of what we've seen over the last 10 years. Would be what I would predict.
Yep, that sounds realistic to me, because it goes back to something we were saying previously about how you have to read the polls and interpret them in the context of the political situation. That spike in the polls doesn't necessarily mean that John Swinney's approach is popular with the public, because most of the public don't know what the approach is, don't understand it. They only know what's in the headlines in the national. And of course, even the British press will proclaim this as the SNP getting back on the independence hobby horse. So one way or another, the public is going to be deceived into thinking that this is actually action for independence, and it most certainly is not.
Agreed.
Right, we're out of time. So I thank you, Stephen, and goodbye. And it just remains for me to remind you that I'll be back on Wednesday afternoon, and I haven't a clue what will be happening then. Bye.